Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers, sisters, and friends. Jazakallah khair for joining me yet again for our sixth session now. This time, we're going to be discussing, inshallah, the necessary attributes and characteristics of the divine reality. The divine reality, of course, being our creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we're going to refer to Allah as the divine reality at this point because in terms of our argumentation, this is as far as we've got. So we've already covered two sessions on characteristics of a da'i and the methodology of giving da'wah. We did last week on epistemology, argumentation, scientism, how do we know anything and things like that. And yesterday we covered basically a scientifically sound deductive argument for the divine reality, where we basically argued that for anything to exist, there necessarily had to be something that always existed. So I hope that all made sense. And yeah, everything. So basically, we're going to continue on from yesterday's topic. Now, just a word of warning here. So the slides here that we're going to be discussing are going to be talking about chains of causality and things like that, which we didn't actually discuss in the previous session because that was actually more for the intermediary level. Yesterday, we just basically did a very beginner argument, whereas these slides were actually written against and for people who had gone through the more intermediary level where we discussed chains of causality. But it's a very, very simple concept. Inshallah, I'll try and explain it as we go along. Anyway, so today, characteristics of the creator, or characteristics, attributes, necessary characteristics and attributes, however you want to call it. So, Bismillah. I'm assuming you guys can hear me okay, because you guys haven't said anything. You're very quiet today. But, okay, so the first necessary characteristic that we know about our creator, from our origin, the source of our origin, is that our creator, this divine reality, must out of necessity be independent and established. And I'll come to what I mean by established right now, but it must be independent. And what does independent mean? It basically means that it is free from reliance upon anything else. So literally, it doesn't need anything else. Now, compare that to everything else, everything that is created. For example, you, me, everything else. Everything is dependent and limited in one way or another. For example, we are dependent on food, on water. We're dependent on others for, providing us healthcare. We're dependent on, our mother for carrying us when we were developing in the fetus. We're dependent on, our parents or people to look after us, to help us grow. We're dependent on people to educate us. We're dependent on, things. We have needs to sustain us. We need shelter. And we also have, because of our dependencies also enforce limitations upon us. So we're dependent on food and drink. So we have a limitation that we cannot exist indefinitely without food and drink. That without food and drink will basically expire, will basically perish. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Quick brief question. How do you address people who still insist science has the answers and evolution is a fact and abiogenesis started everything? It's very hard dealing with people who don't have a sense of rationality. Not only that, but dying rational and logical conclusions. Okay, let's it would have been a good question to come at the end, but okay, we've just started. Let's go with that. Okay, let's go with this because we've just started. So it's kind of like a segue and add-on from our previous session. Okay. Problem is with all right, how do you address people who still insist science has the answers? Okay, so here's the number one problem. If science has the answers, science doesn't have all of the answers to everything. At the end of the day, science is limited only to natural processes. There was a whole slide and a whole section on this in the second epistemology section that we did. So that was last week on Sunday, which is also up on YouTube as well. So we did a whole section on it. Science in and of itself is limited only to discussing natural conclusions. So in and of itself, it can only determine how things work in a natural way. Not necessarily why, but just how things work, what the process is, what's going on. And from that, you can use logic to infer further things. So that's the first thing. Science doesn't have all of the answers. Science just has answers with regards to natural processes because it's a methodology of looking at natural things. So obviously, if you have to have a process of looking at natural things, that is just called science. Science is not this magical new invention. And even if you want to consider it a magical new invention, it was Muslims who came up with it, in our pursuit of getting to know our creator from examining our creation. Evolution is a fact. The whole session last week was exactly on this topic. Evolution is a fact. Evolution is a scientific fact. It is not an absolute fact. There's a difference there. Evolution is a scientific fact. Fine, no problem. We as Muslims, we've got no problem with that. As a scientific fact, no problem. But it's not an absolute fact. In the sense that it is an all-encompassing idea for everything. And even then, if you wanted to call it an all-encompassing, absolute fact, well, then what kind of evolution? Because there are different kinds of evolution. There's Darwinian evolution, there's Lamarckian evolution, I think that's how you say it. I don't know. I'm glad Sabur's not here, otherwise he beat me up for getting it wrong. But there are different models for evolution as well. So this idea that, evolution is fact, well, which version of it? Because the biologists are not agreed on exactly how it works. So if they're not agreed on exactly how it worked, how are they agreed that it's a fact? So we covered this topic in great detail last week. Evolution, in fact, and everything. It's very hard dealing with people who don't have it's very hard dealing with people who don't have a sense of rationality. So that's why we went in the first session of epistemology, we dealt with argumentation and raising that intellectual price tag. What we haven't covered yet is how to actually have start up a discussion. We're going to cover that, inshallah, towards the end of all of this, which is basically where you need to have some kind of an agreement in the first place with them, where we're gonna have a discussion based on rational means. But if they want to, at the end of the day, here's the thing. If you remember from our second session, so this is the second video, I believe, where we were talking about the role of da'i is only to convey the message. It's not our obligation. It's not our role to convince someone. So if someone really wants to be irrational and just coming up with all kinds of, irrationalities or illogical conclusions or whatever have you, it's absolutely fine for you to say, okay, fine, no problem, and walk away. Because, you're only there to explain. And if they want to be irrational about it, it's not for you to force feed it and ram it down their throat. All you can do is just expose how irrational they're being by demonstrating that, look, there are far more plausible, better explanations for our reality based on the evidence at hand, rather than what they're coming up with. And maybe if they have that little degree of humility, they might actually reflect in your absence. They probably wouldn't do it in front of you, but in your absence, what you want to do is leave them with a seed of doubt there, that they're thinking that, why is it that for their worldview to make sense, to be coherent to them, they have to resort to absurdities. And that's where the seed of doubt needs to start growing for them, that they'll eventually have to start thinking about it, thinking, okay, let's have a look at your perspective, and maybe your perspective does actually work. When I say your perspective, the Islamic perspective, maybe that actually works. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Video started at Twitch account to learn more, inshallah. Dealing with atheists who do not accept the creed. Of course. I mean, yeah, obviously they're driven by this idea of disproving. But I mean, we covered all of this already. So have a look through that already. Plus, at the end of the day, yesterday we went through a coherent, scientifically sound argument, deductive argument for God. So literally, if you just take them through that and just stick to the rules of argumentation and say, look, these are my premises. Which one of these do you want to deny? They have no way out. They have no way out. So at some point, they have to confront the fact that their worldview makes no sense. It's not coherent. It doesn't conform. For it to even work, they have to break so many of their own rules. So how can you have a sound methodology where just to get it off the ground, you have to break every single rule in the book? It doesn't work like that. So the only thing you can do is just expose how irrational they're being. I hope that makes sense. I don't want to basically repeat the whole thing because, like I say, it's all on YouTube. But we covered specifically this exact stuff already. So maybe we just need. It's just probably a case of practice. Yeah, no problem, no problem. Okay, so back to the characteristics of the creator. So as we mentioned, creator must be independent in that independence is that we are it's not basically dependent on, obviously independent, it's not dependent on anything. It doesn't require anything else. There's no dependency, there's no limitation, whereas we have dependencies, we have limitations. For us to even exist, for us to do anything, there has to be so many other elements involved, be it people, be it attributes, be it circumstances, be it machinery, be it tools, whatever have you, that we cannot do whatever we want to do without there being something else around us to assist us, something else or someone else. And because of our need and our reliance upon these external things, we also then have limitations within ourselves. Now think about the creator of everything, the divine reality that existed before. I want to say before what literally is existence. Okay, is existence, because everything else is transient. The divine reality exists. I don't want to say timelessly because it's not at the beginning of time, wherever have you, because that suggests that time was happening independently of the divine reality, which we'll come to. The divine reality exists. It is existence, whereas everything else is transient. And because the divine reality exists and brought everything else into existence, oh my God. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi barakatuh, bro. This is my brother who I haven't seen him for months. Assalamu alaikum. Good to see you, bro. I'm missing you. When you're back in the UK, let me know, man. We need to catch up. Yeah, what was I saying? See, man, you just put you just pushed me off my thought, man. Dawat Husam, Jazakallah khairan for the sub, bro. That's a pleasure. Jazakallah khairan for helping out. Inshallah, you'll help keep this momentum going, inshallah. Yeah, bro, Sak, you made me lose my train of thought now. Okay, so this divine reality literally brought everything else into existence. So there cannot be any dependency on anything else because there literally exists nothing else outside of the divine reality. Does that make sense? There is nothing else outside of the divine reality that exists. So there doesn't exist anything that it could be dependent on. And it literally brought everything else into existence. So everything else is actually dependent on the divine reality, because other than, if the divine reality didn't exist, nothing else would exist either. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so what do we also mean by established? Well, we mean established in the sense that there is nothing else that could exist, that could even be brought into existence, that could move the divine reality from its position. Okay, you cannot have anything else now brought into existence that becomes the definition of reality, that becomes in and of itself eternal, because if something else was brought into existence, then by definition it cannot have been eternal because it literally had a beginning. Does that make sense? So literally it's impossible now, by virtue of the divine reality existing and nothing else existing, for anything else to come in and to now take its place. Does that make sense? So that's basically what we mean by established, in that the divine reality is, and that's literally the end of the story. There is nothing else that can be. There's a really good line that I like, that's in The Prince of Egypt, actually. So which I'm sure is taken from one of the religious books, where God is speaking to Moses from the burning bush and says, I am that I am. Right? So Allah, the creator, is it literally, I'm not sure how else to explain it, but it is. And when we're talking about Allah is, we're talking about in the absolute sense here, whereas everything else is transient in the sense that there was a point where we didn't exist. at this point we do exist, and there will come a point where we don't exist. Does that make sense? Hold on 1 second. Okay. So I just had a brief message from Sheikh Yusha. So the divine reality, basically, for all of these reasons, basically it has to be necessarily independent and established. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I don't want to basically repeat myself too much, but I'm hoping that these Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, I'm hoping all of this stuff should be to a certain degree self-evident, free from confusion. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. The creator, the divine reality, must necessarily be timeless. Okay, now this is a little bit more of a complex topic. So what is time exactly? Is independent the same as self-dependent? I don't like the phrase self-dependent because everything, you could argue that independent means independent of third party, of external things. Obviously, for you to do anything, you depend on yourself. But yeah, independent basically means independent of anything external to your own self, basically. So yeah. So timelessness. So let's understand exactly what time is first and foremost, okay? Because this is a very, very confusing topic. Time is basically an ordering or a sequence of events. Okay, that's basically what time is. So I want you to consider a photograph, okay, and a video. What's the difference between a photograph and a video? Right? Think about it. Because they're both capturing essentially the same thing, except a video, you've got full motion video. You've got a sequence of events, father playing with the son, throwing a ball, things happening, whatever have you. Whereas a photograph only captures a single moment. Okay? So a photograph, you wouldn't be able to put a time on a photograph. What's the time scale from the start to the end of the photograph? It doesn't work like that. Let's forget slow shutter speeds and whatever have you. Photograph is just capturing a particular moment. Okay, we'll put the slow shutter speeds aside for a moment. Okay, whereas with a video is taking several images, whatever have you, over a period, sequentially, and that's what you can put a time index against. Okay, so when events are happening, that's how you measure time. You measure time by a sequence of events. So if there are no events happening, then essentially time ceases to exist. Okay, which is why before the creation of our reality, from a scientific perspective, there is no time, which is why, before time, whatever have you. So you may have noticed I was a little bit woolly around talking about, what happens before the beginning of time, whatever have you, because some people like to trip you up on language. Time doesn't exist before our reality, because before our reality, there were no events from the perspective of our reality in order to be able to measure time. But you know what we mean in terms of causally prior rather than temporally prior. Causally prior, basically. Okay, let me explain this now. We're starting to get really philosophical. Maybe I should have done the advanced things. You can have in a set of causes, you can have causes that are temporally prior, which means they occur before in time. So, for example, when you throw a ball and it smashes a window, the ball being thrown first happens always before the window gets smashed, right? You won't have the case where the window gets smashed and then you throw the ball afterwards, okay? So this is a normal cause and effect chain where you have something happens and then you can see that something else happens. The time difference between the cause and the effect can be reduced almost to zero. In the example, let's just say you had a ball and you put it on a pillow. That the ball pressing on the pillow and the pillow changing its shape. So the ball pressing on the pillow is the cause, the pillow changing its shape is the effect, but they happen at the exact same moment in time. So, but that doesn't mean just because the pillow is compressing, you could argue that the pillow changing its shape and compressing actually has an effect on the ball. there's still a cause there's still something happening that is causally prior to the pillow changing shape, and the prior cause is the ball landing on the pillow. Okay, I know we're getting a little bit off topic here, but it's important to understand the nature of time. That basically time is just when you have a sequence of events. So everything in our reality that's happening, stars are exploding, molecules are moving, water is flowing. We may not be aware of all of this, even if we're sleeping, things are still going on. We can still measure time. There will come a point, and I alluded to this in one of the earlier sessions, where we discussed the heat death of the universe. Actually, I think it was yesterday. Actually, we discussed the heat death of the universe. That there will come a point in time of our reality when everything will cease, where all of the stars will explode, all of the matter will be scattered, everything will just be spread out, and all of the energy will basically just slow down and stop. And at that point in time, when there is no more movement, when there is no more reaction, when there is no more events, it would be impossible to separate one moment from another moment, and at that point time will cease to exist. And that's basically the heat death of the universe, that at that point nothing evermore will ever happen, which was an evidence that we know that's why, because we haven't reached that stage, we know our universe can't be eternal in the past. But the point that I'm trying to get to is to demonstrate that the property of time is a necessary component, or is a component of our reality. And therefore, the creator of our reality, the divine reality, okay, so let's just say the creator of our universe, the divine reality, Allah, God, is outside of that and not bound or restricted by time, cannot be measured by time, cannot be subjected to time. So I've put here very specifically that the divine reality is timeless rather than eternal, because eternal suggests still bound by time, but just that it's not going to be limited by it, in the sense that there will be a beginning or an end, a cessation to it. I've specifically said timeless because to demonstrate that no, the creator can't even be subjected to time. It's not, time does not apply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to our creator, because it's a property of our reality, and our creator created the reality along with the attributes of time with it. I hope that makes sense. I know that we're getting a little bit, probably a little bit deeper here than we're used to, but yeah, I hope that makes sense. Obviously, let me know if I need to explain it again. So talking about the chain, let me talk about the chain here, the chain of causality, the chain of events. So basically, because this was discussed in the intermediary section of proving the divine reality, which we didn't cover. So consider a chain of events, or a sequence of events, which is the history of mankind, right? Which is a history of, people are going to do this event will happen, that event will happen, then, this will happen, etc., etc., etc. Now, from our perspective, we're just watching this play out in real time. According to our moment in time, things are just playing out. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. But an entity that is outside of time, that can see the whole thing in one go, has full and total knowledge of what happened in the past and what happened in the future. And also, if something were to change here, how that might change events in the future as well. Okay, so this is also how it's very rational to understand that the creator of our reality has full and complete total knowledge of all of the events that would occur, past, present, and future, from our perspective. Because again, the past, the present, and the future is literally only from our perspective. The arrow of time here is literally subjective upon us. It's just linked to us directly. Okay, I hope that would make sense. Right. Okay, next one. We know that this divine reality, that our creator, must necessarily be unlike anything else that exists or that you could imagine. So let's just, if God is timeless, how does he cause the universe to begin? So again, this is well, God is timeless. God says, God wills our reality into existence. He doesn't need to be, the time aspect is a property of our reality. So yes, there was, I suppose you could argue, a point when our reality didn't exist. The problem is to try and understand something that's beyond our reality with the limitations of our reality. That'll make more sense. Let's cover this first, and then I'll bring it back to that, because this slide actually covers part of that. So now let's just do this exercise for a second, right? I want you guys to close your eyes and imagine some kind of an animal, some kind of a creature, something that you've never seen before, right? Just take a minute. Just conjure up something brand new in your head, a brand new creature, something that bears absolutely no resemblance to anything else that exists. Okay? No resemblance at all to anything else that exists. And you're probably sitting there thinking, and you know, you've come up with some weird and wacky creatures, but I'll bet you that whatever you've come up with, you haven't come up with anything new, because this as an exercise is actually impossible for us once we now realize it. Okay, as an exercise, it's completely impossible for us to have a completely original thought, because anything that we create will actually have some bearing or some resemblance to things that we've already seen. Now, we've seen lots of different types of textures. We've seen skin, we've seen fur, we've seen stone, tiles, ceramics, water, fur, feathers, you know, whatever. You know, there's so many different types of textures that we've seen, but we cannot yet imagine, you know, something brand new for our animal. We've seen, you know, layouts of eyes, face, limbs, whatever have you. Again, it's very difficult now and impossible. Well, it is impossible for us to conjure anything new that doesn't bear a resemblance to anything that we've already seen. Because in reality, we can only imagine that which we've already been exposed to. Okay? Your imagination is, and people like to think that their imagination is unlimited. It's not. It is actually completely limited. Your imagination is limited strictly to that which you have been exposed to and that which you've seen. So unless you've actually seen something or been exposed to something, it is impossible for us to conceptualize or to imagine it, right? And so therefore, following from that, because we have only seen aspects of our natural world, and even then we haven't seen the whole of our natural world. When I'm talking about our natural world, I'm talking about the entirety of creation here, right? We've only seen a very, very small glimpse of that, and we're still struggling to imagine something beyond it. But the point being that even if we were exposed to all of this, the creator of it must also necessarily be different or beyond that. So there is absolutely no way that we actually have any tools within our mental faculties to be able to conjure up even in any kind of imagery or whatever have you that would be close to what the divine reality would be like. Does that make sense? How we're seeing an animal in a dream. It's still an animal. You still recognize it, right? Whatever the animal is, it bears resemblance to something that you've seen before. Even if you take components, you know, you might have taken the eyes of a lion and the face of an eagle and the body of a shark or whatever have you. It's still, you know, the essential components are still things that you've seen before. There is nothing about it. There is nothing about anything that you would imagine that is completely unique. Whereas the creator, being necessarily beyond our natural world, would have you know, characteristics and attributes beyond something that we can imagine. So it's impossible for us to imagine that. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And that also then in the same way also demonstrates for us the limitation of trying to imagine what time was like before the beginning of our world. That, you know, because people then sometimes ask the question, oh, well, what was God doing before the beginning of our world, and what will God be doing afterwards, and this, that, and the other. And the problem is, even the question itself presumes some kind of a linear timeline, that you know, God is just existing and traveling in space or whatever have you, and then decides, oh, I'll just create, you know, the Milky Way and this galaxy and whatever have you, and then afterwards there'll be something else. That doesn't work, because again, we've already established that creator has to be, you know, time doesn't apply, or we have no basis in which to apply time outside of our reality, because just because of the nature of what time actually is. Does that make sense? Like, we cannot fathom what anything beyond our reality is like, and therefore we have no basis upon which to apply the mechanics that or the rules or the laws of nature of our reality on anything that is beyond our reality. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So in the same way, so imagining or asking these questions and things like that just demonstrate first and foremost that we're still trapped by thinking in paradigms that are specific to our reality. But also secondly, and probably more importantly, these questions are pointless in terms of how do they affect and how do they change our daily lives and our ibadah, our worship to God. It doesn't. Not in the slightest sense, right? I mean, because even sometimes people will ask, did God create aliens or whatever have you? My response or my question to this is, how does that change what you believe? Does it change your belief in Allah, in God? Does it change your belief in the nature and the ability for Allah to create aliens or whatever have you? And does it change the way that you worship? Or like literally, what aspect of your belief, of your actions, of your ibadah, of your worship does it change? Absolutely nothing. So it's one of those questions that literally you should just leave it. I mean, okay, fine, it's fine to wonder about it, but you're not going to get an answer to that, at least not in this dunya. I mean, inshallah, we'll have the opportunity to ask our creator these things, and you can have an answer then at a point when you'll be able to understand and comprehend, inshallah. But right now, it's a distracting question. So it's not something that you should really, or anyone should really be dwelling on, or at least allow it to drive any aspect of their faith. Okay? Right. So I just also want to show you, right? Oh, by the way, here's a hypothetical question as well, right? Being as now it's impossible, and we've demonstrated it's impossible for man to have an original thought, right? So this idea that some atheists say that man created God, created the idea of God. Well, if man can't create anything original, then how do they explain where the idea of God came from? You see? At the end of the day, this idea of an absolute creator had to have come from somewhere. From our position is it came from messengers that were sent to us that taught us about it. But from the atheist perspective, this faculty of thought, where does that thought even come from? It exactly fitra. But from an atheist perspective, fitra doesn't exist. You see, again, lots of issues that just need to expose that show that look, the way that atheism views reality is not holistic. It leaves lots of gaps. Okay, so by the way, yeah, so that's what I'm going to show you. I was going to show you some pictures of some creatures that atheists say they're rational. Yeah, they're not. They're absolutely not. The atheists are some of the most fundamentally irrational people that I've ever come across as well. They are just as dogmatic and passionate as religious zealots that they claim to be arguing against. They're really yeah. And this is kind of what I want to be able to expose, and just show you guys, look, how you can deal with them. Atheism is literally just the easiest methodology, ideology, whatever you want to call it, to just rebut, because it just makes absolutely no sense to anyone who's thinking rationally, in my humble opinion. And again, from demonstration and argument. So some examples of some creatures that exist on Earth that you may not be familiar with. This is a pacu fish, and as you can see, it's a fish, but it has teeth that are very, very similar to human-like teeth, right? Which I thought was quite unusual. This looks like something out of a horror film, an alien movie, whatever have you, but it's actually a real thing. It's called an isopod. So yeah, very nasty, disgusting things. I never wish to encounter one. By the way, these are things that live in the ocean deeps. But yeah, definitely it's a real thing. This is this really weird thing. It's called a scooter plane. it lives on the bottom of the ocean floor and basically feeds on deposits and things like that. But I mean, could you imagine that as a creature? You're just coming up with some kind of a bubble and things like that. But I'm expanding your mind now. But I'm sure you guys wouldn't have thought of anything even close or similar to this. Right, here's my absolute favorite. Check this one out. Okay, this is a red-lipped batfish. That's literally what it's called, a red-lipped batfish, which yeah, just it's a fish, but it crawls around and it's got lips. So yeah, if you want to imagine weird and wacky things, by the way, they exist in our they exist in our reality. So there you are. Okay, so we've done what have we done already? We've done independent, established, similar things, similar, not the same, and timelessness, and free from anything that we could ever imagine. Okay, so next is immaterial. Okay, so immaterial. So our natural world is made up of obviously material things, right? Material things, what I mean is anything that you can literally touch. Okay, so it's something physical, something solid, or anything like that. If the creator of our reality, if the divine reality itself was also material, then that would provide limitations in terms of size, shape, density, color, whatever have you. There would be some kind of limitations and dependencies there. As well as questions that would arise as to where did this material comes from, what happens if this material is damaged, if it's taken away, if more material is added, why that particular amount of material, and blah blah blah. It just creates, it just creates so many more problems that need to be addressed and resolved. And actually, to presume that the creator of reality is material based just makes absolutely no sense. Because it provides absolutely zero explanatory power for anything. It just raises more problems than it solves. So therefore, it's more rational to conclude and to affirm that the creator of our reality must be immaterial, because at the end of the day, it brought material world into existence. That it's not created, it's not limited and bound by a physical makeup, of subparticles and things like that. Okay, I'm not sure if I'm explaining this well enough, actually, but let me know if you guys are getting the point. That the creator of reality is not made up of like subcomponents. Like we're made up of subcomponents, right? We're made up of flesh, blood, bone, skin, whatever have you, and even those are made up of subcomponents, which are cells. The individual biological cells, and even the individual biological cells are made up of subcomponents, whatever have you. So there's a whole series of dependencies there upon material. What I'm saying is that the divine reality cannot be materially based. It's not physical in this sense, because that in and of itself would contradict the properties of independence, etc., and being limited and by other things, because they would cause limitations. Does that make sense? So it must, by definition, be some kind of the soul is not a material thing. The soul is not a material thing. So actually, well, that's a good point. So the question here is, let's think about this question, because this is a contention that sometimes they'll bring up, which is that but you know what? I don't even know if that animation played out, right? So it is part of our reality, yeah, but it's not a material thing. What I'm specifically negating here is that the creator itself is something material, is something physical. Okay. Yeah, there's plenty of things that's part of our reality. Love is part of our reality, but it's not a physical thing. You can't put it in your hand. Okay, so question here: can something immaterial, okay, something that cannot be physically touched, something that doesn't physically exist, can something immaterial cause a physical result? What do you guys think? Something immaterial, can something immaterial cause a physical result? Because this is the contention then that people will raise. Yeah, okay, do you want to give me an example? Give me an example of something immaterial that produces a physical result. The mind, okay, how does the mind? Okay, well, okay, that is actually the example I was going for. So you can raise your hand. right? So your mind, your consciousness is not a physical thing. Your brain is physical, but your mind is your consciousness, your self-awareness is not a physical thing, right? However, you can, from your mind, from your own free will, whatever have you, choose to perform, cause physical actions. Now, from the scientific perspective, we know that the brain triggers some kind of chemical reactions and motor effects and whatever have you. But from a scientific perspective, as yet, it's beyond science, and from my understanding is it'll remain beyond science. They cannot work out where the intention is actually created because, from the naturalistic perspective, there is no will. Like the decision to raise your hand or whatever have you is a chemical reaction that's going on in your brain. But where did that chemical reaction start? What was the instigating point? Again, science is not going to affirm the existence of a mind because it can't, because you can't naturally, empirically measure and test it. So again, from a scientific perspective, science, again, I want to make this clear. Science doesn't say the mind doesn't exist, but science has no knowledge, consciousness, awareness, whatever have you, of from a physical, naturalistic perspective of what the mind is. Okay, we just happen to know from our own first experiences, from our own self experiences, that there is something going on. There is a mind. There is the ability for me to will certain things to happen that causes physical results. Okay, we can also actually artificially create this as well with hardware and software. So software, you can't actually touch the software itself. But depending on what you've written, whatever have you, the code that you've written, you can actually produce material results. You can bring about things on screen. You can cause actual physical things in the real world to happen. So again, we can actually reproduce this process of, things that are immaterial actually can bring about material results. So the idea of an immaterial divine reality bringing about a material reality that we exist within absolutely conforms to everything that we know. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's go with another property. Powerful. Right. Let me just, because I actually loaded up a video here, right? Let's play a video and let's watch a video together. I'm going to turn my mic off. We're going to watch a video actually of a star size comparison. So to compare the star sizes within our reality. So it's just going to be a couple of minutes, but let's show you that. I'm going to mute the mic. So let's just have a look at this. Hold on. Actually, I can unmute the mic because I'm just not going to play the music. The music is just there for dramatic effect. But you can see here now that, look, the size of our moon, and by consequence, the size of us, you can't even see it on that scale. It's ridiculous. It's barely the size of a pixel, if at all, anything, right? And now look just how massive, these are only the things that we've been able to discover. These are only the things that we just know about. It is absolutely possible there are way bigger things that exist. Look at that. That's, every single time we're just getting bigger to a ridiculous, indeed, subhanallah, Allahu Akbar. It's just getting, size wise, it's the biggest thing. Like, okay, so that's the rest of the video actually just goes into some numerical data, but look at the size of that, right? That is, it's we're getting beyond a point where we can even understand and understand the size and the magnificence of literally the creation that we're in. Now think about this. There are, I don't want to say countless because you can't actually because you can't count the number, but there are a huge number of atoms. One of the building blocks of in all of the creation, and these are just the stars. They don't include, other asteroids and other things like that, right? But there's a huge number of atoms within our reality. Now, if you just consider the energy contained in a single atom, you split a single atom and that produces a huge explosion. That's the basis of an atom bomb, is literally splitting an atom. That's also the basis of, nuclear energy now, where you fire atoms one another and you capture the energy and things like that. That's being released from them. There is a huge amount of energy in every one single atom, right? And you just think about how many atoms exist in the entire, I don't say, yeah, in the entire universe, in all of reality. And all of that energy, all of that power had to come from somewhere, right? So, when you compress a spring and you tie a spring down, it means that you needed to exert the power to compress the spring, whatever have you. If you've got like a billion springs, that have all been pre-compressed and tensioned or whatever have you, that necessitates that there was something that had, exerted that energy to store all that potential energy there, right? So it just makes you think that how powerful must the creator of reality be, that all of this power, and again, we're talking about magnitudes, that's beyond our imagination, that we can't even imagine how many atoms there are, let alone then what this means in terms of the power of those atoms, which is only then just a demonstration of the power, or of the divine reality in just creating that. Does that make sense? Like the power of the ability of the divine reality, just demonstrated by creating our reality, just demonstrates that there is a power there beyond what we can even begin to conceptualize. And again, this must be a necessary characteristic. You cannot have a divine reality that's not, completely powerful. Otherwise, our reality, just wouldn't exist. All of this energy, all of this matter, all of this power just wouldn't exist. It makes no sense. Okay. Hope that one makes sense. Right. So we know that this divine reality must be intelligent. Okay. Because how do we measure intelligence? We measure intelligence by you can measure intelligence by seeing the output from something that is intelligent, right? So when you see something, anything, a device or whatever have you, that is functional, that is aesthetically pleasing, that is multifunctional, does a variety of things. So let's just take the mobile phone, for example, right? The mobile phone today, in 2021, literally does almost, all things that you could imagine. It's a video camera, it's a photo. In fact, actually, do you know what, there's, I should have actually found this picture, right? There's a picture somewhere that shows, there was a newspaper advert for, one of the electronic shops, and it had like, camera, video, photo camera, video camera, word processor, blah 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 blah, all of these different things, all of these different products. And today a mobile phone basically does everything. You can watch videos on it, you can make videos on it, you can read on it. Literally, you have the world's knowledge at your fingertips. You can play games, there are so many different things that you can do. And they're particularly these days, they're also aesthetically pleasing. They look pretty cool. They're very slim line, slim factor, the high resolution displays and whatever have you. So the point is, we have a device here that is capable of doing many different things, right? I mean, at the end of the day, a phone only just needs to make and receive phone calls, but that seems to be like it's a feature that's so low down on the rung of phones today. It's not even an issue. It does so many different things, and it does so many different things well, and it looks great, and it's got other physical properties. It's being waterproof, shockproof, this, that, and the other, whatever have you, right? That you can tell just from the existence of the mobile phone itself that whomever created this mobile phone, made this mobile phone, must have been intelligent, right? That this could not have come about by chance, that there was an intelligence at play here. And obviously, the greater the sophistication, the greater the functionality, whatever have you, it demonstrates greater intelligence, because obviously, you're not going to have a less intelligent origin producing something that is way better than than from an intelligent origin. Does that make sense? So you can tell the intelligence from what you're holding in your hand, right? And obviously, you can acquire intelligence over time, which is how technology improves and whatever have you. But the point being that there is a way to measure it. Now, just have a look at the nature of reality itself, right? Just have a look at, excuse me, alhamdulillah. So just have a look at, for example, the examples I've given there. Water, the nature of water. Okay, actually, let's go back 1 second. If you were to ask a child, to draw a beautiful picture, what is that child going to draw a picture of? For the most part, I will bet you anything that child will draw a picture of a scenery with the sun in the corner and a hill with a tree, maybe some birds, and a lake of water. That is what human beings intrinsically recognize as beauty. So let's just have a look. That's actually where I picked these elements from. I don't even know if I mentioned it there. Did I mention? No, I didn't even mention it there. Right. Okay. So water, for example, it gives life, right? It's required for life to be sustained. It's home for aquatic life, right? You have fish, etc., that literally live within the water. It floats upon freezing. This is a unique aspect to water, actually, that everything else, when you freeze it, the molecules contract, it becomes a lot more dense, and it becomes heavier, and it would sink. Water is actually specifically unique, that literally at freezing temperatures, its molecules expand. So ice actually floats, which is an important characteristic, so that when water freezes, it doesn't freeze from the bottom of the lake and force all of life out, but rather it freezes from the top of the lake and creates a barrier and still allowing life underneath to continue onwards. It's completely unique in that aspect, okay? So it floats upon freezing. It's a solvent. You can dissolve things in water. You can clean things with water. You can cool things with water. You can cook things with water. There are so many different uses to it, and it's abundant throughout the planet. And that's just one thing, right? Then you have trees, home for wildlife. Trees are necessary because they convert carbon dioxide, which we exhale, which becomes poisonous to us. That they convert that back to oxygen, which we need. They're aesthetically pleasing. Again, we love looking at trees. We like gardens full of trees and whatnot, right? They provide fuel for burning. A lot of the industrial age was fueled by trees, and actually our cars today are to a certain degree still fueled by this, because where do you think oil and things like that, which petrol is coming from, is coming from? These are trees and other organic matter that have just decomposed over millions and millions of years, so it's still providing fuel. Fruit, again, from the trees. Shade, material for construction, you build buildings and whatever have you. Paper, paper, like how was knowledge disseminated? Trees also, important in binding the earth. There was also, there's another fun video actually that demonstrated the filtration process of natural earth in a land where there was no trees and a land where there was trees. So they basically flushed water through, and you can see in the land where there was trees basically binding the earth, that the water that came out was actually pure and clean, whereas in the other lands, that basically just allowed sludge to just come through. So it's important for binding the earth and helping other processes as well. Wood floats, useful for making boats. Although the laws of physics allow things like metal to be used as well, but it floats, so that was that's useful. So many different benefits and things like that from an aesthetically pleasing thing that, again, it just self-creates. Trees give rise to more trees and whatever have you. And even the atmosphere, the sky, shields against ultraviolet radiation, space debris. It prevents meteors and whatever have you, so if they burn up on re-entry and whatever have you. It allows radio waves, because radio waves work by bouncing it off, bouncing signals off the atmosphere, which is how you can get a radio signal over mountains or whatever have you. atmospheric pressure, which obviously we need in order to maintain our composure, otherwise we would explode, water vaporization, stable temperatures in order for us to be able to live. So many different things. You can just go on and on and on just from exploring our reality that and again, very beautiful, very aesthetically pleasing. We like to look at this stuff. We like to, a clear day where we can see the skies and whatever have you. That's our almost pretty much universally the idea of this is beauty. This is natural beauty that we can't get away from. So how can one suggest that all of this was created, all of this originated from something with no intelligence? Surely all of this just demonstrates supreme level of intelligence, that all of this is just naturally occurring. And again, also with evolution as well, even if you want to believe in evolution and averages or whatever have you, from the Islamic perspective, obviously we as Muslims, we refuse to accept that man developed through evolution, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that Adam alayhi salam was created by his own hand. But as for all of the animals, whatever have you, fine. If you want to go with that, we're not going to say one way or another, because there's no affirmation or denying one way or the other. But the point there being that even if you want to accept it, right, my argument for that was it just shows the supreme intelligence of the one who created the cell to allow the cell to be able to split and divide and ultimately form that living creature at the end of a very, very, very complex process that we cannot even start off ourselves, that we in the sense that we can't even create that ourselves. Okay, so every single thing that we look at with regards to our reality only points towards the supreme knowledge and intelligence and mastery, construction work, however you want to call it, of our creator to have created all of this in such a way. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So again, so this is a necessary characteristic that we don't need to have be told, that we can just derive this just by looking at the end results of what else exists. Okay, so we know that how are we doing for time? Okay, right. We know that our creator has a will, because for a timeless intelligent being, i.e. our creator, to have a finite effect, which is our reality. Our reality is a finite effect. It means our reality started to exist for a period, and will also cease to exist from the heat death of the universe, at which point obviously we'll have a different reality, inshallah. Inshallah, may Allah reunite us all in Jannah. I mean, but the point being that for something that is timeless to create a specific finite effect, there must have been a choice to do so. Okay, and that choice therefore then indicates a will, the ability to, and again, not even just the choice to create, but even the manner of creations, because reality didn't have to be this way. It could have been any other way that the creator willed. It indicates that there was a choice, there was a reasoning, there was a process why it was done in this particular way. So because there is a will, right, and what I'm trying to separate here is the concept of a will, that our reality was not created by some kind of a machine that had no personal input into the matter, that just produced from random variables, right? What I'm saying is that the very fact that our reality was produced with specific characteristics in mind shows that the creator had a choice in choosing characteristics, and the ability to choose necessarily demonstrate that there is a personality or a will or something that you can engage with there, because it can make a choice one way or another. Things can be or not be in a particular way, whatever have you. Okay, so because there is a basically that's all we can establish, is that there is some kind of, obviously, we established intelligence now, but there is some intelligence, knowledge, but there is a will there is a personality there is some kind of a decision making there, that there is some kind of, basically, something that can be engaged with there. Okay, so the creator of our reality was not some kind of super sophisticated computer or robot or anything like that. There was definitely something not organic either. There is something else, but something that can be engaged with and has a personality of some kind. Okay, and again, I'm using very loose terms because it's not appropriate to, again, our vocabulary, the English language is restricted to dealing with concepts that are familiar to us as human beings within our paradigm, that we don't have the vocabulary to attribute accurately to the divine reality. So we have to use, words that are familiar with us, but with the understanding that it's being applied to the divine reality in another context. Okay. So this was a question that somebody asked yesterday. How do we know that the creator was or is uniquely, distinctly one? Well, first and foremost, Occam's razor. Occam's razor, if we remember the principle from this session last week, there was a second session from epistemology right at the end. This is the last slide. Occam's razor held that the simplest explanation with the most explanatory power was the closest to the truth. Now, let's start from, blank slate. How many creators are there? What's the simplest answer? How many creators, how many divine realities are there? The simplest answer would be 0, right? But 0 creators, 0 gods, whatever have you. But does that provide explanatory power? Absolutely not, because if you imagine, and this is 0 is the argument of the atheists, but it provides no explanatory power because it cannot explain how our reality is actually here. Does that make sense? Our reality is here, and if there was 0 creators, if there was 0 divine realities, our reality would not be here. So this answer of 0, whilst it is the simplest answer, it cannot be the correct one because it provides no explanatory power. So then we have to increase to 1. Okay, there is one divine reality, there is one creator, there is one God. Does it explain everything that we know about our reality, the origin of our reality, the nature of our reality, etc., etc.? Yes, it does. It explains it fully, amply, without leaving any gaps. Fine, no problem. Now, for the sake of hypothetical discussion, let's increase the answer to 2. Okay, let's just presume that there are two gods, there are two creators. Does this answer anything? Does this provide any more explanatory power? Absolutely not, because there were no gaps left from our previous answer. Does it cause more problems? Yes, it does, because now it causes the problem that if there are 2 divine realities, supremely all-powerful gods, whatever have you, how do you differentiate them? Which one is more powerful? What if one wills one thing, one wills the other thing? It puts you in a position where you are now creating more problems, and there was no reason for you to presume that there were multiple creators in the first place, when literally the single creator in and of itself answered everything. So first and foremost, the idea or the knowledge or the notion that there could be multiple creators, where that even comes from, there's no basis to even presume that. Okay, so for anyone who wants to argue that point, that aside from just literally arguing it as a hypothetical discussion, hypothetical discussion, there's literally no basis in which to presume that is even a possibility, because it's also logically impossible as well. Because at the end of the day, if you have one thing that is by itself exists necessarily, then how could you have something else that also exists necessarily? Because you would never have surely you can't have 2 things that necessarily exist, because that implies that the one thing could not exist without the other, which is a dependency that's been superimposed on them. But then that dependency must be governed by something transcendental. Okay, let me explain that one another way. If we say, how does God provide an explanatory power of our reality? How does one God provide explanatory power of our reality? Because one God, one divine reality, is capable of creating all of reality and everything that we are familiar with. It had to come from somewhere, so we just need an origin. We have one God provides the explanation for an origin of everything. That's the explanatory power. What was I saying? Right, yeah, okay. So if you would say that there were 2 necessarily things that had to always exist, right? So you have A and B, right? That then means that if both of these necessarily had to exist, that none of these could exist without the other, right? Which means now there is a limitation and a dependency on these with each of the other, like a yin and yang thing, right? But that dependency then needs to be governed by something transcendental to them that's superimposing that dependency on them, which would have to be something else greater. Again, it makes no sense. Okay? because they can't govern themselves, because otherwise they could break that thing, and there needs to be no other thing. It's starting to get a little bit deep and philosophical, which I want to try and avoid. The point being that to argue this idea that there could be multiple things makes absolutely no sense, right? There would be no ultimate first. I mean, it's all written there. I don't want to just read that out because you guys can obviously read it as appropriate. So the lawgiver is the lawgiver. We're talking laws here, natural laws and things like that. Is necessarily the first cause, as discussed previously. Everything else would ultimately depend on it. Now, so because this raises questions of what happens if these two different personalities have different wills, that one wants to will something one way, one wants to will something the other way, and then what happens, because does the will of one trump the other? Does the will of both happen even though they're contradictory, or do they just always agree, whatever have you? And this question actually does come up sometimes, that people say, people used to come up with, what if there were two gods, but they just happened to agree on everything altogether? Basically, that question there. What if two gods decide to work together? So there we go. Right. Here's the answer to this. You have a look at the circles now at the top, and you tell me how many circles do you see at each stage. So at the first, there's 5 stages there. At the first stage, you can see 2. Second stage, 2. The third stage, 2. The fourth stage, 2. And at the 5th stage, in fact, actually, can I move my mouse all the way over there? I don't even know where that was. Oh, actually, no, forget it. Oh, my mouse was there. Oh, yeah, of course, it's over here, isn't it? Yeah, okay, here we go. Sorry, I've got this running on multiple different screens. Right, so here we can see 2. There we can see 2. Here we can see 2. Here we can see 2 circles. But now at this last stage, how many circles would you say you can see? Would you say there's only 1 circle there, or would you say there's 2? Because if you say there's 2, I'm going to ask you, how do you know there's actually 2? Now, you might say, well, I'm extrapolating, what happened from here, and I'm just presuming it. Or you might actually just say, well, no, I can only see 1. And here's the point. If you have no way to tell 2 different things apart, if 2 allegedly different things are exactly the same in every single characteristic, they are one and the same thing. There is no basis for you to differentiate them into 2 things. Okay, on what basis? If they're exactly the same, how are you differentiating them into 2? Okay, so for example, you have identical twins. Let's just say you have identical twins that are identical right down to the atom, right? You can still tell them apart because they're physically occupying different space. One is standing to my left, one is standing to my right. They have different names. They might be actually actively engaged in different things. The point being that there are so many ways that you can literally actively tell those guys apart. Whereas if you have 2 conceptual things where there is no way for you to tell it apart at all, there is no basis for you to presume that there's 2. There is actually only 1. It's just 2 in your mind. Okay, I hope that that would make sense. The law of identity and necessity. There must be one God. Don't know exactly what that law is, but I'll go with it. Okay, so I mean, the point being here is, look, from a rational perspective, just from thinking about it fairly rationally, there is no basis to presume anything otherwise, and we go with the thing that is the most obvious. Okay. Okay, so the last slide. Now, let's see. We've covered a lot of different characteristics here, and I want to make a very, very, very quick segue. Now, this is the segue to the next section. How does the creator define themselves? And we're making a little bit of a jump here towards the Quran. Okay, that and the reason why we have to try and make a jump towards revelation is to understand that if we were created, we must have been created for a purpose, and we are not able to work out what that purpose is ourselves. We have to refer back to our creator to understand what our purpose is. Because look, you consider the example of anything that was created. Anything that was created was always created, always had its purpose defined by its creator. The chair cannot decide, this chair that I'm sitting on cannot decide to now be a ballerina. It was designed as a chair by the person who created it. Same with the desk. It can only always ever be a desk because that's the way that the nature the person who designed it to be. So the same with us, when we were created for a purpose. We can't attribute our own purpose to ourselves. We have to refer back to our creator. So we have to start looking for some kind of revelation, right? We'll come to this in next week, inshallah, when we're talking about the Quran. But here's something interesting as a segue, right? Let's have a look at how the creator defines himself from the Quran, from Surah Al-Ikhlas, which is 112th surah, chapter of the Quran, which says, "Qul huwallahu ahad." Say He is Allah, the uniquely, distinctly one. Okay, so now we have an indication of the name of this divine reality, how we can refer to this divine reality, rather than saying the divine reality, or this generic phrase God, which is a really, really poor phrase, because you can have God, goddesses, and everything can be a god, whatever have you. It's not a unique name, whereas Allah is a unique name. But we also know that this creator is uniquely, distinctly one, which is something that we have from a conceptual analysis perspective, we can come to know and agree with, because we just did that literally on the last slide. Okay, Allahu Samad, that Allah is Samad, is something that is, again, timeless, established, independent. Samad is like something which is just fixed. It's just there. It's something that is immovable. It's beyond the limitations and whatever have you. So it encompasses all of these meanings of timelessness, established, independent, whatever have you. And we've demonstrated how it's rational to conclude this through conceptual analysis, that this must be the nature of our creator, before we even looked at this, right? Lam yalid wa lam yulad, that he begets not, nor was he begotten, that he does not procreate, and nor was he created. So let's go with the nor was he created, right? Nor was he begotten, created. That we know, obviously, from something being necessarily existent and independent, whatever have you, that by definition there can't be a dependency on any creation process, right? But why not create others? Why not create anything like him? Well, first of all, forgetting aside the absurdity of anything created by definition, therefore cannot now be eternal in the sense, or independent, because there's a dependency on creation. Let me just give you in terms of a power thing, right, a brief example of what this would do to power, right? Does the word also include necessary being? I don't know, actually. The way I was understood the word samad, what it was referred to, it was kind of like if I remember correctly, it was kind of something like a boulder that was fixed in place, that could not be moved. That this boulder was something that was beyond any kind of abrasion, any kind of decay, any kind of movement, anything overpowering or whatever have you. That all of this was contained in the word of Samad, that it is, and nothing else can ever change or affect that it is. So again, the words in Arabic are a lot deeper. You can extrapolate them out into multiple English meanings. Maybe. Allahu Alam, but I don't know that for sure. Anyway, so in terms of this begetting business, right? Let's think about this. So in times of old, right, in the Arab culture, it was advantageous to have lots of children, particularly lots of sons. Why? Because the more sons that you had, the more power you could basically exert. And there's something that needs to be implicitly understood here, is because man implicitly understands that man is limited and man is weak, and therefore to have more power you need to have more men. The more men you have, the more powerful you actually are. Does that make sense? So the more of something that is limited and weak in and of itself, something that is limited, the more of them you have, the more you increase the extent of your influence, shall we say. Okay? So something like, let's just say twigs. A single twig on its own, you can break it. Put 10 of them together, it becomes stronger. The more you put together, they become stronger. So that's why in those kinds of situations where there are limits, it's advantageous to have more. Now you imagine a different scenario from the reverse. You have a king of a land. okay, which has ultimate power and authority over everything. Now, if you add in another king, does that increase the first king's power or diminish it? Of course, it diminishes it because the first king had absolute control over everything. The second king is not bringing more dominion with them because the dominion is already belonging to the first king. So the second one is only there as competition for the first one, which at best means that there's no change, but at worst means that there's some degree of conflict there. Does that make sense? So when you're discussing, or when we're with something that already has complete and total power, it makes absolutely no sense to then bring in a competitor for that power. It's not a sign of strength, but rather it's an act that will only weaken the original. Does that make sense? In the case of absolute power, in this case it only adds strength when you already acknowledge weaknesses to begin with, in the case of, for example, cultural things or anything to do with our reality. So in this case, again, so we know from this ayah that he begets not, nor ways to be begotten. Again, this is something that again matches what we could conceptually analyze and understand from our reality. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, and there is nothing like him. There is absolutely nothing like our creator. And again, we know that everything else that exists by definition is going to be limited, is going to be dependent. Everything in our reality is material to a certain extent, whatever have you, that they will have characteristics and limitations and dependencies and whatever have you, that the creator of our reality is completely free of. So by definition, our creator is completely different to anything and everything that we could possibly imagine. Okay, so in just these four short statements, these four short ayat of the Quran, that we have the most concise and accurate description of our creator that exists in any text. There is no other description anywhere that is concise and accurate and nails down the description of our creator just so concisely, bang, that this is it, that we can just confirm ourselves just by pondering and thinking about what our creator must necessarily be like. So being as the Quran is the only document, is the only artifact that exists within the history of the world, shall we say, or within the availability now, that accurately points to what our creator is like, and actually claims as well to be from our creator, it makes sense to now examine this Quran, to examine this document, to ascertain, the nature of it, whether, it is actually from our creator and whatnot. So that will be the subject of our next session, which is going to be next week on Saturday, InshaAllah, the preserved message, where we will go through again, deductive, conclusive arguments. How do we know that the Quran is true? And basically, actually, we're going to be demonstrating the miracle of the Quran itself. So this is the lecture of all of the things I am the one most proud of, because at the end of this, inshallah, you will see the miracle of the. So I mean, we're all told, oh, the Quran is miraculous and this, that, and the other, but unfortunately, it's experiencing that miracle is beyond many of us. Inshallah, I'm actually going to expose that, so at least on some level you can actually say that, actually, no, now I understand the depth, the gravity, the miracle of the Quran, and why this Quran, why Rasulullah said that he has been given no other miracle except the Quran. Of course, he was given other miracles, but the miracle of the Quran is so far beyond everything else. Inshallah, we're going to be discussing that next week. So, with that said and done, let's have some questions. A necessary being is a being that everything is dependent on for its existence. Not necessarily. And a necessary being is a being, and something that is necessary is something that cannot have failed to exist. Okay, so this is, and the reason why I want to make that term clear is because there's an argument for God's existence called the argument of contingency, which is based on one of the premises being that our universe, our reality, is not necessary, because if someone was to argue that our universe was necessary, that it couldn't have failed to exist, which is, you have to argue that if you want to argue it being eternal or whatever have you, then you have to be able to show and argue why the universe why every single atom had to exist in this particular way. Now, the counter argument to that is, look, the atoms that make up this pen, is it possible that this universe could wait, here's the pen, right? Oh no, you can't see that pen because it's right. Okay, so this here, right? The atoms that exist, that formulate this stylus, right? Could our reality have existed without these atoms? If it could have, that would have been an alternate reality, and therefore this reality is not dependent. The only way you can argue that it's dependent is to say that this had to have existed, and it's not possible for there to exist a reality where this is not there. Now, an example of this, which is a gray area where there's some debate, for example, of something that is necessary, is numbers. Are numbers necessary? Is it possible for there to be any kind of an existence where you have no concept of numbers, where you have no concept of counting? Which is an interesting question in and of itself, but that would be an example of something that you could consider necessary. So it's not, you don't have to have it that a necessary thing is something that everything else is dependent on. Necessity just means that everything, that it could not have failed to exist. Okay, and everything else being dependent on something just means everything else is dependent. Okay, so there's a logical fallacy here called what's it called? The undistributed middle, where you have one thing and another thing, and they seem similar, and you're joining the two, whereas that link is actually not actually a correct link. Okay, or is existence a necessary being does not accept non-existence? A necessary being does not accept non-existence. Well, a necessary being exists necessarily. Yeah. So it's not a case of accepting whatever have you. It's a case of that it could not have failed to exist. So I hope that makes sense. Are there any other questions with that, or shall we wrap it up? So again, the notes and the slides for this will be up. This will be up on YouTube, inshallah, later on, at some point today. The notes will be up. How do I prove that God is independent? We went through this this was the very first slide that we demonstrated that, okay, by existing necessarily in the absence of everything else, that shows that the existence, and by bringing everything else into existence, it demonstrates that there was no reliance upon anything else. And if there's no reliance or dependency upon anything else, that by definition is independence. Does that make sense? What do I think about the watchmaker analogy? I actually don't give Dawkins too much thought. But okay, so what is the watchmaker analogy? Which is that, actually, I don't even know what the watchmaker analogy is. It's just basically, it's just some nonsense that just comes by, things just come about by chance, whatever have you. But, if you listen to Sabur does a very thorough job in debunking all of this stuff. And for me, it's a case of scientism looking at things the wrong way. For example, when you find, if you find a puddle full of water, there's two ways of looking at things. You can either presume that the water took on the shape of the puddle, or if you want to be an idiot, you can presume that the shape of the shape of the puddle, i.e., the indentation in the ground. Sorry, let me say that. You could presume it was quite the coincidence that the water found a puddle in the exact shape that the water was already in. Does that make sense? Like, the rational person will believe you pour water in any kind of a shaped hole or whatever, have a pothole or whatever indentation in the ground, it's going to form into that shape. But you could also look at it the wrong way and presume that water already had the shape and basically forced that shape into the ground, or had to find a shape that matched. Okay. But yeah, it makes little sense to me. But again, these guys have to jump to absurdities to make their little analogies work, and their analogies, they don't actually work. Right. What about the attributes of life, knowledge being part of the essential attributes? What about that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-hayy, like the ever living and things like that. So you see, obviously, there's a limitation to what you can derive um, just from conceptual analysis alone, right? We can't derive everything about our creator. Like we can't derive the name of our creator through conceptual analysis. You can't just sit there and think and automatically come up with the name. At some point, we have to be told, we have to be educated. We need information from an external source to advise us more. So in terms of what we can derive through conceptual analysis, you know, there's limitations. You know, this idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our hayy, the ever living. Like, what does that even mean? And how do we conceptually analyze that? You know, when life could be something different to what we understand it to be, which it would necessarily be something different to what we understand it to be, because for us, life is a biological process based on, you know, needs and you know, inputs and outputs. We have food, we have outputs, you know, excretion, things like that, which by definition the divine reality wouldn't have. So we can't even apply the same kind of a language to it. So we can't derive that. We only know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we call Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, hey, only because that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes himself in the Quran, because we take the Quran to be true. But there's a gap there, you know, and it's very important to recognize that certain attributes and the nature, you know, for example, the nature of paradise, Jannah, Jahannam, paradise, hellfire, etc. We only know that through scripture. So we have to understand, like, how is it that we're making the jump? So here's a very important point. Just, you know, the argument that we did yesterday, how, you know, how do you know that, you know, because sometimes atheists will say, you know, when you're doing this argument, blah, 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 how do you know that that's God? Because the argument doesn't prove that that's God. That's true. It just demonstrates that there's a divine reality there, that there's an entity there that created everything else. We don't know that that's necessarily God. For that, we need to, you know, the jump to scripture, which is what this segue is, that, you know, there's so many different scriptures around out there that claim to be the truth, whatever have you. How do you know where to start? Well, it's a good place to start with the one that literally, you know, correlates to what we can conceptually analyze to begin with. I hope that one makes sense. Okay. Much of the atheists I have discussion with come up with these say yeah, with the watchmaker analogy. Yeah, it's Imam Sanusi demonstrates how those two attributes using rationally, although he relied on the Quran for the attribute of seeing and hearing. Okay, I don't know that one. I don't know how he did that. Maybe it's possible. It's not something that I've come across. So again, keeping an open mind. I don't know that it's not possible. It just I couldn't imagine that to be the case with, you know, based on what I know, that you could come rationally, conceptually analysis, come to this idea that the divine reality is alive, because just to use that term makes no sense in context. Or and we're not saying alive or dead. We're just saying that it's a different state of existence, because and we're not even saying that it's you know, non-life. There's some obviously necessary kind of existence, but it's where vocabulary falls down. We don't have the words to say. I think I'm trying to do that is to establish that the creator exists first and then move on step by step. But what tips can you give me when we talk about atheists who are hardcore atheists? Okay. Actually, I was going to cover this. So I tell you what. There is actually no, I think this is more appropriate for next week, actually, for when we've done the Quran. Uh, but really, okay, I'll give you this question in advance, right? The question that I love, you know, especially the hardcore irrational atheists, the question that I love to ask them, and it's going to take you some practice to get proficient with this, is what would they accept as proof for God? Okay. What would they accept? Because here's the problem. It basically comes down to proof, right? And I would advise, you know, go over the sessions of epistemology again, just really, really carefully. What would they accept as proof for God, right? And in my experience, they actually cannot come up with any kind of an answer, because the problem is, if they come up with an answer, A, they would have to justify their answer as being rationally sound. So they can't pick up something irrational because they need to be able to justify it. But once they've also come up with an answer, now they have to bind themselves to that. So once you basically hit that target, then they have no room to move anywhere else. in my experience of asking atheists this question, they actually never really come up with anything. They come up with some stupid things or some things that are immeasurable. Oh, you just have to convince me. That's not a proof. Just having to convince you. Give me some kind of an objective, measurable, attainable target, and even then, that target needs to be objectively justified. Like, you have to show that why is that the objective. And they might come up with, well, write a scientific paper and get it peer reviewed and win the Nobel Prize. Well, okay, hold on. You want me to write a paper in science, a paradigm that only deals with naturalistic things, about something that necessarily exists beyond science, and have other scientists agree with it from a scientific perspective? Like that in and of itself makes absolutely no sense. But again, it's kind of like you've kind of got the sword here now, but you just need practice on how to wield it, so to speak. Does that make sense? They said God would know what would convince them. God would know what would convince them. How do you respond to that? God does know. That doesn't necessarily mean everybody is guided. At the end of the day, they will become convinced when they're resurrected. They're not going to deny Allah on that day, but on that day it's going to be too late. Just be, So here's the okay. So here's another way of looking at it. Then they have the aspect of free choice. Okay, I was about to say free will, but it's not actually free will. They have the ability to choose, freedom of choice. Now, the reality could either be one of two ways. Either we would have to recognize the truth and the reality of God, which would mean that would have to be dictated to us, that we couldn't choose our own path. But then they would call that dictatorship. So they have the freedom to choose. Do they want to believe? Do they not want to believe? Do they want to conform? Do they not want to conform? They have the choice there. And then the necessary part of having a choice means that they can choose to go against what the evidence, what the fact, rationality, what everything basically points towards. And if they choose to do that, that's their own choice. They can't then blame God or blame anything else for them exercising their own choice. At the end of the day, they're accountable for their own actions. That makes sense? They come up with illogical arguments. That's all they come up with sometimes. Do you know what, bro? I tell you what, make sure you're here for Saturday, right? Saturday bring this point up again, because I've given you one question now, but my all-time favorite question at the end of the session on Saturday, ask me again. Ask me at the end. Don't distract me at the beginning. Ask me at the end, and I will give you my favorite question for atheists that as yet there is no answer to. They cannot answer it, because any answer they give would ultimately point towards Islam. Okay, that's my promise to you guys. Cool. Any other questions? If not, let's call it a day. Jazakallah khairan. So yeah, like I said, this will be up on YouTube shortly, inshallah. If you guys could please share the khair, let other people know. The notes will be there as well. So share the video, let other people know about the session, let other people know about next week whenever you give. We have loads of good. Yeah, so maybe there's an approach of how you're beginning off the conversation, right? So don't expect the instant results. You shouldn't be having a conversation with the expectation that someone's going to take shahada at the end. You have to find the right seed. So you need to pick an approach where you're just planting the seed. Just let it grow slowly at a time. Just plant the seed. Ask them the questions that going to force them to think. Oh, also, and by the way, something that I know Hamza is going to berate me for if I don't mention this, but again, it's the same message as yesterday, that all of the stuff that we've come to understand about our creator, whatever have you, we should also, as well as be using this to explain to other people who Allah is, the nature of our creator and whatnot, we should also be not neglecting the fact that we need to be taking every single opportunity to, we need to use this information to come close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to love him, to worship him, to recognize the immense abundance of favors that have been granted to us that is beyond our counting, and to recognize our dependency and our servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on that. Yeah, okay, 100%. But like I said, it could be an approach. I don't know. I'm just seeing things one dimensionally, but Yeah, I have a similar thing. You know, it's very difficult to convince people who don't want to be convinced. Um, so you know, just keep at it. Like I said, your role is only to convey the message, not to convince them. So we just free ourselves of that, and you just need to get, you know, I don't want to say get better because I'm not saying you're bad right now, but you know, just keep the practice in and just try different ways of, you know, trying to make your point across to people. But yeah, okay, does that make sense? Right, let me just try this one thing because I didn't do this thing yesterday. Um, Hold on one second. Is that there? No, nothing else is there. Okay, cool. Right, so I'm gonna call it a day there. And say Jazakallah khairan for tuning in, and yeah, you know, Jazakallah khairan, especially to Dawah to Islam for the follow and for the subscription. And inshallah, I will see you guys again this time on well at 3 o'clock BST, British Standard Time, on Saturday to discuss the miracle of the Quran, the preserved message. Jazakallahu khairan. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.